Welcome to Searching Smarter with Selby Jennings, the podcast for hiring managers and professionals navigating the job market within financial sciences and services. Whether you're searching for top talent to grow your team or considering your own career move, this podcast will help you do so with confidence. I'm your host, Jesse Scaff, Global Client Director for Faden International's Financial Sciences and Services brand, Selby Jennings.
So there are these gloom and doom pieces of analysis that get published now and again. 30-40% of the people in work today will not have work tomorrow. I think their calculations are wrong. They're looking at it from a full-time human position, not as a question of tasks that are just supporting everyone in their jobs.
When you say, the leaders are leading in talent as one of what your four main criteria are for the index, is that they are hiring the most? Is it that they are hiring the best?
The right talent profile is changing quite rapidly. 3 years ago, you would want to see a talent profile of having a lot of data engineers and data scientists, and there's a lot of things to build. With Gen AI now, there's a less need for that, and there's much more need for
My guest today is Alexandra Mousavizadeh, CEO and co-founder of the eminent AI indexing and rating company in financial services, Evident AI. We talk about the symposium she and her co-founder recently hosted in New York City that I was fortunate enough to attend, the results of the most recent Evident AI Index, their flagship rating system of international banks leading the way in AI, what separates leaders and laggards in AI, and what the talent landscape looks like as the future of AI unfolds. A truly fascinating conversation and extremely relevant to everyone in financial services and the role AI will play in their role in the short and long term. Hi, Alexandra. It's great to see you.
Hi, Jesse. It's good to see you too.
Can I first start by saying I really enjoyed the Evident AI Symposium back in November. It was a treat to have been invited, and I learned so much. So thank you for that. And it was a really wonderful exposure and experience and insight into AI and machine learning within financial services. So thanks.
Well, it was good to have you there. It was busy and chock full of sessions on exactly that, sort of where we are, what's the lay of the land in terms of AI adoption in financial services, which is actually really interesting. So I'm glad you were there and glad you enjoyed it.
To that point, well, first of all, as you can see, I have my Evident AI Index on the bookshelf behind me, so keeping it for safekeeping and good reading. But without further ado, I think that's a great place to start for today's conversation, obviously, as we'll be talking about AI within financial services. So maybe the first question is, how did you yourself and maybe your partner, Annabelle, how did you get into AI? How did you found Evident, and just your career journey on how you've come to this point in your career?
Well, yeah, thanks, Jesse, for asking. We actually set up Evident to build the first, probably ever, I think, because we haven't seen anyone else do it, public ranking of businesses on their AI adoption maturity or capabilities, how far they are in adopting AI, sort of, and where it is in the banks or other organizations that they're using it, and sort of measuring just sort of where in that journey they are. And we set out before ChatGPT was released. So we didn't know that was coming. All that we did know was that there was a lot of demand across many businesses to really get a better understanding on how they were performing and spending compared to their peers. Are we getting as much bang for our AI buck as our peers? Because it is no cheap undertaking to invest in AI in a big organization. There's so much that needs to be considered, and it takes a lot of resources. You've got to look at talent, you've got to look at your whole organization and make it AI focused. You've got sort of legacy data issues that you need to fix and so on. The question came to me because I had built the first global AI index back in 2018, which was ranking nations on the strength of their AI ecosystems. And that came to me as a commissioned piece of work back then, because there was no doubt that, obviously the US and China were leading, but other nations like the UK, Singapore, and even smaller ones like the Scandinavian countries were trying to work out, like, how do we position ourselves in this race for AI? And so got commissioned to do that. But the reason I got commissioned to do that is because I have a long career in benchmarking and indexing both nations and businesses. I spent many years at Moody's and at Morgan Stanley, and I also was the CEO of a smaller global rating agency. So I've been knee deep in how to build the best index in terms of, what you do, how you weight it, what data sources are you using. So when there was this blank space out there and many more people looking at AI and how do we measure it, that question came to me because they're saying, you're an index expert. Can you do this on AI? And then sort of to go way back, I did my degree in economics and specialized actually in game theory and mathematics. So I feel I came a bit full circle.
That's an outstanding and really interesting journey. So if we dive into a little bit into the index itself. So JP Morgan, repeat, I guess, winner or repeat place at number one, Capital One, number two, RBC, number three. But from there, talk a little bit about how you rate these financial institutions. I think in the top four, it was the same top four as last year. The Canadian banks overall performed better as a group. What are some other trends that you noticed in this year's Evident AI Index?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that last year, we, as you say, released the third iteration of the Evident AI Index for banks. We released it in October. And it's based on the data that we pulled together from that year, and it had been an extremely active year. So all banks had been out there, actively investing more, hiring more, disclosing more, thinking about their innovation stack more, right? So what we were seeing is, and you're looking, we score the banks on, and I can get into that in a minute, on what we score them on, and then we rank them according to their score. But the overall score had increased significantly. So all the banks had shifted up. Well, not all, but them had. And as you said, the top four banks had retained their position, but they had been growing at 2x the rate that the rest of the banks in the index had. So what we were seeing is that the leading banks were sort of leading even more, right? The gap between the leading banks and the lagging banks had grown even more, even though everyone was active. So what we were seeing from a JP Morgan and a Capital One and so on was just, they were hiring at 2x the rate of other banks. They were patenting and researching. They were partnering with hyperscalers and so on. So we sort of obviously see that the trends were that the banks that had already worked extensively and for many years on what you would call integration readiness, sort of getting those decision-making processes down, getting the data rails working, and so on and so forth, just were much better and more, capable of really onboarding AI and Gen AI and now agentic AI faster than the banks that actually had to do all of that homework and all of that sort of integration readiness work before they could start even thinking about what use cases they should select to go into production. So we saw, leading banks, that gap between the leading and the lagging banks growing. I often get the question, which is, at what point can you not catch up any longer? I would have said last year, probably, you want to start really considering this now if you haven't, and you probably have a window of 3 to 4 years. And I would say that window is rapidly getting smaller. I would say, it's more 2 to 3 years now. At some point, the leading banks will, have driven home the efficiency gains and starting to see a revenue uptake. And that means that you can do more with less, and you're gaining market share and you're much more competitive. And you're going to start to see that eating the lunch of the banks that are just not, because they're going to be doing a lot less with, more investment, which means, with more cost. That just means that they're less nimble and will struggle to keep up. So those are the trends. And yes, the Canadian banks as a whole, on average, do better than the European cohorts. And I think, there's various theories about that. But one of the main points, and it's something we're seeing in the UK right now, because Keir Starmer has just released on Monday his big AI strategy, is that the Canadian ecosystem and the Canadian policy environment is quite conducive for commercialization of AI and supporting businesses in adopting it at pace. So I do think there is this link between the policy environment and, business adoption. And when you look at the UK statement from Monday, the big focus is on supporting businesses and helping them adopt AI quickly. And of course, that's of great importance to any government because it's supporting future economic growth. It's bringing productivity levels up. It helps quell inflationary pressures and so on. So it is quite important at a national level as well.
We could have an entire 2-hour-long conversation around AI policy and as it may be supported by government. So we're going to park that one there just for now. And because this is a recruiting focused podcast, I want to comment quickly that you mentioned talent. And I have a question for you, and maybe the answer is both. But when you say, the leaders are leading in talent as one of what your 4 main criteria are for the index, is that they are hiring the most as far as volume is concerned? Is it that they are hiring the best, or is it both?
The short answer is it's both. But just to take a step back, the talent pillar in the index weighs the most. It weighs 45%. And the reason is that, it is impossible to move forward in your identifying your use cases and actually building the solutions for your use cases and moving them into production without the talent. So the talent is absolutely essential. So a lot of the AI strategies that you see that the banks are rolling out, of course, it's around spend, but at the end of the day, it's about getting the right talent in. And the right talent profile changes actually, is changing quite rapidly as we go, right? So 3 years ago, you would want to see a talent profile of having a lot of data engineers and data scientists, and there's a lot of things to build. With Gen AI now, there's a less need for that, and there's much more need for the AI talent that relates to the execution and implementation. So we're seeing that come through in the data that we have a data feed that's sort of almost real time. But when you see what the leading banks are hiring for, they're hiring at that implementation end of things. So they're hiring a lot of AI software implementation engineers. They're they're hiring AI product managers and so on. The ones that are looking at how best to get it to into production, into the hands of their either employees or customers. So that talent profile does change, right? So and it will probably continue to change. And there's even an argument for this talent pool is going to very rapidly change over the next couple of years with agentic AI coming in and being adopted in the bank. So you're sort of really taking a lot of tasks away and some functions away, but also the need to actually build a lot of this in-house so that you don't necessarily need to be so talent heavy. So that's something that we're considering in terms of how we might re-weight some of the aspects of talent in the index. So there is a really interesting question about what does that optimal talent pool look like next year? And that's, of course, something we think about a lot. So what are the banks going to be hiring for?
And that would be, as far as the talent is concerned, that would be those, with regards to agentic AI, those who can use the AI tools as much as those who can create things from scratch or are maybe working in, a lab per se or a center of excellence in these institutions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say, there's very much an argument. There's a big debate around the value of having a big research lab within the banks. Like this was something when Jamie Dimon back in 2017 says, I'm going to make JP Morgan an AI first company, which was great, right? Because what he was doing there was making sure that it was understood that there's a mindset shift in terms of we need to spend on it explicitly on AI. We need to hire the talent. We need to rethink the way our organization is run to some extent. We need to lift the people and the experts up into our executive committee. So there's a much shorter distance between making, deciding on the strategy, deciding what needs to be spent on, that needs to be really close to the executive team. But also one thing he did was that he established a big research lab, which he hired in Manuela Veloso, the brilliant robotics expert from Carnegie Mellon, to head up that research lab, and she's amazing. Many banks have looked at that and sort of tried to emulate that. But really what he was doing was saying, we need to act like big tech, and big tech spends a lot of money on R&D. And the reason why you do that is because you're trying to bring blue sky thinking, but also applied AI research into the bank. So you can have expertise on hand. So when we're looking at what problems are we facing now and potentially next year, we have a team in-house that can really work on that. And I don't think that necessarily will go away, because there's always going to be things on the front end that a bank will need to be considering. You need to have researchers in-house. There will be things that will continue to be a cross between traditional AI, Gen AI, and agentic AI. You've got quantum on the horizon. You need the thinking inside the bank that is with a research mindset that is very specialized, that can be brought in to, a very specific conundrum, maybe that they're having on the trading floor, or when it comes to loan portfolios, or when it comes to trying to work out the kinks with no human in the loop, sort of customer-facing products when there's so much inaccuracy in the Gen AI products. How do you do that? So they're going to do, this talent pool is not going to go away or not be needed. It's just going to be that some aspects will always be needed and some aspects will be changed, because it's not that Gen AI is now here and agentic AI is coming in, and that means that negates all of the needs of AI expertise in the banks, because so much still runs on just classical AI that is constantly evolving, which is machine learning that is supervised or unsupervised. I mean, so much of the banks runs on classical machine learning. So and is doing that in areas where Gen AI just isn't appropriate, because it wouldn't work. Gen AI is something that you can overlay in certain places. There are lots of use cases for that, but it still wouldn't be everywhere, right? So so one shouldn't think that the AI talent pool of today is going to be completely different. It will be somewhat different on the margins, but it's obviously something that we have to think through all the way to the nth degree, and then sort of come back and sort of think about what does that mean for what we're looking for and how we weight it in the index.
I think it was Teresa Heitzen, also from JP Morgan, in her opening keynote address at the symposium said, this is not a full replacement. AI, whether it's agentic or Gen AI, is not here to replace traditional AI. It's all an augmentation. So do you have additional comments or thoughts on that, of maybe how that might, how the talent or those who are skilled at the banks within financial services are going to use it as an augmentation, and maybe why they shouldn't be afraid that AI is taking their jobs per se?
Yes, I completely agree with Teresa Heitzen, who is the CDAO over at JP Morgan. I agree with her comments. This is what we are seeing too, is that yes, there will be LLM suites rolled out in banks, which are helpers to anyone in the bank, right? Is to better summarize your emails, it's to take notes, it's to be more efficient, it's to do a deck, it's to tap into the capabilities of the LLMs to just make you a bit faster and more efficient, and give you some tools as starting points for the analysis that you're doing. It will help you, but it's never going to replace you, right? There's never going to be. So those are, we call, they're tasks. They're not, full-time employee replacements. And I think most of the AI that we're looking at, even agentic AI, when you're looking at where it's actually being deployed in the banks today, it's all task-based. So there are these gloom and doom pieces of analysis that get published now and again, where it's looking at sort of very severe impacts on the workforce. 30-40%, of the people in work today will not have work tomorrow. I think their calculations are wrong, right? They're not looking at it they're looking at it from a full-time human position, not as a question of tasks that are just supporting everyone in their jobs. I mean, there are some aspects of the support on coding where you can say maybe banks can do more with less. Not that it's going to, they might then, let's say, not need to hire 10 new, they might need to hire 6. So it might just mean that because of the efficiency gains, some areas will need slightly fewer people. It's not that they don't need the people. So I think that when you're sort of looking then at, AI as being a supporter of tasks, it means that you have sort of a co-working AI workforce in your organization. And I think that's the way to look. And I think that's the right way to look at it. I think there was a big study out of Harvard a couple of months ago, and just pointing out to what I think is more realistic figures is that we're looking at sub 5% of the workforce in 5 years' time will be heavily affected. The rest won't. They will just be supported. It's a bit like when email came in, right? It's just nice that you didn't have to go to the fax machine or to telexes, if you remember that far back, right? You can then send an email and you can send many more and you're just more efficient. It doesn't mean that your job was taken. So.
Right. Okay, good. Encouraging, and something for us as obviously a talent agency to think about, a little bit more fearlessly rather than cautiously. We can be more bold with getting out in front of what the talent looks like rather than being afraid that the talent won't exist. So I appreciate your optimism. One final comment, and then I want to get into just like the closing remarks really quickly. One of the other notes that was mentioned at the symposium was, and it might have been David Wu, who's the head of firm-wide AI product and architecture strategy at Morgan Stanley. There's less need for more intelligence right now, and more of a need and more of a focus should be placed on the content and piping of the existing data and intelligence. What does that mean within banks and financial services firms with regards to the data that they are gathering, storing, and using?
What the banks are really grappling with is making sure, and it's a really big task, and it's not easy, and it takes time. And this is part of where we started, actually. It's this question about being integration ready. Mm-hmm. And part of that, and especially when, and David Wu is brilliant. He's, running all of that Gen AI execution over at Morgan Stanley, who had a really great head start in this because Jeff McMillan established this partnership with OpenAI before ChatGPT was released as sort of as a partner to think through how, when Gen AI, is there, how do we implement it in the wealth management team? And so to go back to David Wu's point is that it's really hard to get successful outcomes of the Gen AI tools if the data isn't properly in the pipelines, which means that they are stored correctly, that they're tagged correctly, and when new documents come in, that they are filed and tagged constantly in a way that they're not lost. Because if you're running a Gen AI tool on internal data and you're missing documents, right, you're going to come up with an answer that is, missing elements of the facts that they have in the bank. So you need to constantly, and that actually can be automated as well, but you really need to think about your infrastructure when it comes to your data pipeline and your data organization and how it sits. A lot of banks are facing, have very fragmented data sets, and especially banks that operate in many different jurisdictions. HSBC, I think, operates in 120 different jurisdictions, and therefore, banks that have a lot more challenge when it comes to trying to knit those data sets together so they're talking to each other internally. So that's critical. So tagging, labeling, filing, it's mundane and takes time, and it's slightly boring to do, but it is so extremely necessary to get right.
Got it. I mean, we've gone from data lakes to data reservoirs to data warehouses to now just the universe is data. So there's no such thing as too much, and it's all about how it's being stored. So great, thank you. I want to close out with just a little the fun stuff. The first thing being a topic that a little segment that we like to do here, which is underhyped or overhyped, and I'll give you a little bit of a tee up here because there was a segment at the symposium called the unhyped use cases. Mm-hmm. So tell me if there's a particular topic within AI that you think is either overhyped or underhyped, and what we might see in 2025.
Yeah, so I have a strong view on this, which is that it is definitely, there's a lot of hype now, but this hype is absolutely relevant and accurate, but in the long term, right? I think the issue is that it is maybe a little overhyped in the short term, but it's underhyped in the long term. What I mean by that is there's a lot of talk about, what AI can do and a lot of concerns around what AI can do as well. But the expectations that all of this is going to happen this year or even sort of within the next 18 months is just not the case. But I think what people underestimate is how much of an impact and this is going to be hugely transforming in the long term. It's going to take time. And right now we're just in the foothills of AI, an AI era, right? But it's going faster than the adoption of, where we were sort of, where we were all starting working with the internet and emails and all of that. That took about a decade. I think we are probably going to see the implementation of our sort of AI workforce and AI tools come in a lot faster than than the internet did. So maybe in 5 years, we'll see that tipping point where it's everywhere and it's in every device and it's in everything that we do. So to answer your question, I think it is short term. It's probably overhyped and it's underhyped in the long term.
Great answer. I think that's our first. Can I have both, please? So I love that. What's next for Evident AI? I believe I have a note here. There's a new benchmark coming out this month. Can we talk about that?
Yes, this is very exciting for us. We have actually now rolled out private benchmark for banks, which is, if you think of the public index that you have behind you, it is a public ranking of the banks on their AI capabilities and outside in assessment of their investments into their capabilities. So what the new benchmark is a inside out survey-based private benchmark that actually won't be in the public sphere, which is all about use case mapping. Where in the bank is AI being used? In what phase is it pipeline testing or production? Is it traditional AI, Gen AI, or agentic AI? And then we roll through the whole gamut of measuring time to production, what's holding you back in the time to production, where are your bottlenecks, which vendors have you used that have been successfully able to get you into production relatively quickly. And then the last bit is about your ROI. So the banks are submitting to us the ROI on sort of overall as it's measured, but also at a business line of business, but also at an individual use case basis. But what is the expected and the realized ROI? So that's of course great interest, because we can then see what the efficacy is of that AI investment, and we can see what the actual, emerging return on investment is on the bank's AI. So we're thrilled to have these two complementary benchmarks that tells basically the entire story of a bank's use case journey from every single aspect that you could possibly measure. And then we're going to go in, we're releasing our index on the insurance sector, as well as payments and asset management this year. And then we're going to go outside financial services next year, which we're going to be preparing for this year. And of course, we'll have our symposium and lots of discussions with our clients and the tech companies on this, question about how do you accelerate AI adoption. So that's what we have in terms of plans for 2025.
Enormous growth and big things ahead. The private survey, private index is very interesting to me. Just a quick question on that. Who is the final, I guess, who are the results being shared with? Is that being shared with the bank leaders for them to then action internally?
Yep. The banks will get their own results against an anonymized peer set. So they can see, I'm a bank in this location, roughly this size. How do I compare to my peers in this region? Or if I want to compare myself to similar sized banks in other regions, what can I learn from them? How are they doing it differently? So it really is really sort of an insight, very detailed insights into the various pathways to AI adoption and ROI success.
Got it. Very excited for the continued growth and the expansion into the other parts of financial services and other industries, especially as we cover insurance and other things here too. So lots of use for us with Evident AI's future products. All right, last things from me. Other than, of course, Searching Smarter, what is a podcast that you might be listening to these days, or a TV show that you're interested in? And what's a book that you've recently read or that you're reading that?
Well, I listen to a scary amount of podcasts, and I love them all. I love Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher on Pivot. I love listening to Norga's big asset manager, Norga's fund, Nikolai Tangen, and his great interviews that most often land on AI. I love to listen to Sriram Krishnan, who just left Andreessen Horowitz to step into the role in government to help on crafting the AI strategy for the US, which will be very interesting. He's very thoughtful. It's a great podcast, very technical, but also macro questions that come up there. There's so many. Hard Fork is another one. I listen a lot to Lex. And what else is really good? Ion AI is fantastic. I listen to some quantum podcasts, which is Quantum Insiders. That's fantastic as well. And I'm going to sound embarrassingly like I have nothing else in my life if I list more podcasts. But I do listen.
You travel a lot, so you download them and listen to them on the plane. We're going to run with that as the narrative.
And my book, I would say what I'm reading now is Thomas Schelling, The Strategy of Conflict, which is all about game theory and behavioral science, which is very useful when it comes to sort of understanding some of the basis for AI, but also just navigating through life. And it's a great read, so I could highly recommend it. That's Thomas Schelling. He wrote it back in 1966, but it is even more powerful today. Timeless.
Love that.
Thank you so much, Jesse, for having me on.
Thank you for being here. Really enjoyed the conversation, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
That's all for today's episode of Searching Smarter. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, keep searching smarter.